Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Irini. Hello,
Hi.
Matthew.
How are you?
Raoul.
Oh, hello. Hello.
Good to see you again.
Nagi. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, darling colleagues. Марчана, как мне поставить презентацию? Antonella, hi.
Hello, Saul. How are you doing? All right?
Right. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Yes, I don't mind.
I am glad to see all and hear at all. Yes. I want to share my presentation, Antonella.
Yes. You want to try and because we still have a few minutes before starting, you want to see if you can share your screen? You want to practice doing that and see if it works?
Okay. Окей. Так. Вот это давай. Вот это. Вот это признано. Видно? Правильно я сделала?
Maybe like that, and then I can drop it.
Okay, perfect. We can see it. No problem.
Do you see? Do you see? Do you see this presentation?
We see it very well, Saul.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay.
Irini, did you want to try to give it a try?
Yes. Does Saul needs to stop here on screen, or can I do it?
Yeah.
straight
No,
away?
no. I think Saul, now you can remove it so that Irini can try.
А куда ее брать? Так.
You have to exit.
It's all right.
You have to exit
Ой,
the
что я
share screen. Okay.
Okay, I'll try mine now. Give me a second. It should be fine, yeah?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
We can see that. Leon, hello, welcome back.
Thank you.
Mercedes, hello.
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 Hello. Hello, darling. Hello, my dear colleagues. Hello, my dear colleagues.
So just a few indication before starting. If you could please silence your microphones when the speaker is talking, and we'll have a presentation, 20 minutes presentation, between 15-20 minutes presentation, and then 10 minutes question. So we won't have the questions at the end of the session. We'll have them at the end of each presentation.
So Antonella, who's timekeeping, you or me?
You. You're in charge of everything.
Right.
But you still have a few minutes because I still have to wait until Adrian tells me that we are live on Facebook, and then we can.
Antonella, can I open my PowerPoint?
Of course, yes, of course, Mercedes.
Okay.
Yes, you have time.
Okay. So. Okay, that's fine.
Super.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. I'll
So,
Dr. Altibayeva, how is your first name pronounced?
oh, I see. Sorry, she's on. She's
Oh,
silent.
she's gone. Oh, right.
Wait a minute. I'll ask her to. I'll ask. Oh. No, she's gone. Let me see. Oh, here she is again.
Yes. But it's
So, but she doesn't have the
per- per-
camera or the phone on.
perhaps she's loading her PowerPoint.
Maybe. So, so Leon, my advice is to maybe read the questions from the chat.
Yeah.
I think it's better than having the speakers reading the questions.
Yeah, I agree. I found that this morning.
Saul, I'm going to write to Saul. If we have a problem, Leon, with Saul arriving on time, maybe we start with Mercedes, and because maybe she's having problems with, I don't know, her internet or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Would that be okay with you, Mercedes, if we start with you, if Saul has a problem?
You're on mute.
Yeah. You have to go back. You have to unmute.
sorry, no problem. No, I can do when you tell me I can start. Okay.
We wait and we wait another 5 minutes anyway.
Okay.
We're not on Facebook yet, so we can wait.
Okay.
I was saying the Facebook connection is also very good.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic! I haven't checked it yet.
I was watching the mornings one because I was at work and I thought to open Facebook, but it was really good. Equally well to Zoom.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you.
So were you watching me, Irini?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize I'd have put on a special show.
Yeah. But yeah, the connection was good. It was the same as Zoom, really. You couldn't say the difference. So yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Excellent. Mm, mm. Right, let me see. Okay, so Adriana is going to give me the link for Facebook. In a few
But
minutes.
if Saul joins in the middle, will you be able to tell her what's happening, or?
Yes. I will write her a message privately.
Just going to get some water.
Right, yeah, sure. Okay, so there you are again. Great. Saul. So so Mercedes, I think you have to silence now because Saul is back. Saul,
Okay.
could you put your microphone on, please? See. So Saul is back, but Saul doesn't have her microphone on.
No.
You have to activate that again. Okay.
Hello.
So
Hello.
fantastic. So if you're all ready, I'll press the button to start sharing it on Facebook.
Okay.
All right. And then it's all yours, Leon. I will disappear from the camera, but I will always be here anyway.
When do I start? Do I start at 16:30? 1 minute?
Yeah, in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll be here, so don't I just won't appear on the camera. Okay.
Угу. Нужно демонстрацию, да, экрана? Пока еще нет, да? Сперва он, да? Угу. Ой, а у меня звук там тоже выключу. Может быть, пока звук.
Good afternoon. I have the pleasant job of moderating this session. So I'll introduce the speakers, and I should warn them that I'm a very fierce timekeeper. So you have up to 20 minutes each, and we'll take questions immediately after each speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce, first of all, Dr. Altibayeva, Doctor of Philology, who is Associate Professor in Kazakhstan, the head researcher of a project, Cultural Codes of Modern Kazakhstan. Her research interests are literary theory, myth poetics, narrative, and cultural code. She's the author of over 130 works, so I won't mention them or else we'll have no paper. And her paper today is Modern Eschatological Myth, Disaster Modeling. Over to you for the next 20 minutes.
Much. I present Kazakhstan, Kazakh University of International Relations and World Languages, named after Avlay Khan. My name is Avlay. Do you hear me? Do you hear?
We don't have a picture of you.
Do you hear?
We can hear you a little, but not too clearly. No, I can't hear you at all now.
Can I start, Leonid?
Sorry?
Плохо слышно. Ага.
Dr. Altibayeva, can you hear me?
Начну. Can I start? Со связью. Он замер.
Saud, I think you can start your presentation.
Well, she's disappeared from the Zoom screen. I wonder perhaps while we're sorting out the technical problems, we could perhaps start with Mercedes Aguirre. Is that all right with you, Mercedes?
Yes, it's all right. It's
All right,
all right.
let me introduce you then, and we'll get back to Dr. Altibayeva.
Okay.
I've known Mercedes Aguirre for quite some time. I always enjoy hearing what she has to say. She's a professor of Greek literature at the University of Complutense in Madrid, but is currently a visiting fellow at the University of Bristol and a life member of Clare Hall, University of Cambridge. Her specialisms are in Greek mythology. She has various publications, and in addition to that, she's a writer of fictions, novels, and short stories based on myth. Today, she's going to give a paper on science fiction and the classical myth of the underworld. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Leon. Okay. Classical mythology offers to fantasy and science fiction many powerful representations, not only characters, motifs, and mythical structures, but also names and visual images. These representations appear in different forms, and their relationship with their mythical sources is not necessarily direct. My paper aims to analyze 3 modern science fiction stories to see how they suggest the myth of the underworld through the use of certain evocative names and some other concepts which coincide with classical narratives about the underworld. Daphne du Maurier had a long and varied writing career. She was interested in ambiguity and in crossing boundaries in many ways, one of them in relation to gender boundaries and her own sexual identity and her self-definition as a writer and as a woman. She was not primarily a writer of science fiction, but rather of suspense or even the Gothic, as in her most famous novel, Rebecca. One possible affinity with science fiction from the point of view of time travel, occurs in the novel The House in the Strand. But the short story, The Breakthrough, with its secret experiments, laboratories, and fanatical scientists, evokes some of the typical motifs of science fiction. The story is told by a narrator, Stephen Saunders, an electronics engineer who has been recruited to work in an isolated environment where a scientist attempts to extract the essence of life, developing a machine which will make it possible to trap the energy released by people when they die. The location in Saxmere, a remote and isolated place on the east coast of England, seems an appropriate place for experiments related to death and the afterlife. When Saunders arrives at the railway station, he is met by a car to take him to his final destination. During the journey, the description of the surroundings recalls some of the topographical features of Hades. The sandy track topped a rise, and there below us, stretching into infinity, lay acre upon acre of wasteland, marsh and reed, bounded on the left by sand dunes with the open sea beyond. The marsh and the reeds suggest the proximity of water, which evokes the underworld rivers and the journey across water, not only Odysseus' journey by ship to the land of the Cimmerians in Book 11 of the Odyssey, but also the journey which the souls of the dead had to take across the river Styx to reach Hades. It is worth remarking that in the 1975 film for television based on this story, the journey includes a ferry which crosses the water to the buildings which are their destination, suggesting even more powerfully the journey to the underworld and the crossing of the river Styx. Stephen's journey then becomes a descent into the underworld, where the first creature he meets is the guardian dog called Cerberus, a name which obviously recalls the mythical monster who guards the gates of Hades. Aeneas, in his journey to the underworld, as related by Virgil in Book 6 of the Aeneid, also meets the monster Cerberus lying in a cave in front of him. The driver in the journey, which takes Stephen to his destination, is Ken, a young boy who suffers from leukemia. Ken will be a necessary element in the development of the plot, as he is going to be used in the experiment at the moment of his death. Another important character is Nikki, a little girl who suffers from some sort of mental disability. She is a vulnerable child, the only survivor of identical twins, and she will be used in connection with what the experimenters call Force 6. He believes that when he puts out the call, it connects Nikki with what he calls Force 6, which in her case is double because of her dead twin. There is nothing left of poor Penny but electric energy, still attached to her living twin. That's why Nikki makes such a useful guinea pig. On the one hand, we have the idea of the twin girls and the concept that the dead girl passes her supernatural force to the surviving girl. And on the other hand, we have the notion of the force of vital energy as the double of the self. The idea of the shadow or the double appears here as in works by Daphne du Maurier, such as the novel The Scapegoat and the short story Don't Look Now. The double is also a significant motif in science fiction. Think, for instance, of the classic film Invasion of the Body Snatchers. There is still another name in the story related to the classical Hades, Charon, a computer capable of speech, though his vocabulary was limited and the actual voice was far from perfect. I call it Charon 1. And Du Maurier adds an explanation which shows an intentional use of the references to the Greek underworld. Charon, if I remember rightly, was the ferryman who conveyed the spirits of the dead across the Styx. And there are even other computers called Charon 2 and Charon 3, which are meant to work together in the final experiment, which will be called Operation Styx. Phase 2 of Operation Styx consisted of bringing the operating table in here, placing it between the three Charons and connecting up with an oxygen unit alongside. The computers can in turn capture and manipulate the vital spark, the soul, in other words. It is an experiment which will push the boundaries of technology And as the scientist affirms, if we succeed, we shall have the answer at last to the intolerable futility of death. The energy is there, when it leaves the body on the point of death. All that energy escaping as we die. The Greeks believed in it. The text indeed refers to the psyche, the soul or breath, which the Greeks thought left the body flying at the moment of death, often represented in vase painting as a small human figure with wings, which sometimes could also represent the souls of the dead on their way to Hades. As Ken lies at the point of death, he is put under hypnosis along with Nikki. Initially, it seems that the experiment has been a success, with the computers showing that Ken's energy has been captured. But after the point of Ken's death, Nikki, still under hypnosis, reports that Ken is asking the experimenters to let him go, and they realize that they may have captured more of Ken than his psychic energy. Horrified, they disconnect the apparatus and release the energy. Du Maurier's story hedges its bets between the supernatural and science fiction, and in the end, it doesn't give an impression of a definitive solution to her complicated and daring plot, or at least it is a disappointing solution, even if it expresses the success of the experiment. Du Maurier was always fascinated by questions of life and death. She believed in an afterlife, and it is clear that, as she had a strong knowledge of classical myths, in this story, she tries to convey the idea of death and the afterlife through the motifs and names of the classical underworld, which helps to assure a continuity between the characters of the story and the reader, so as to create a shared cultural background, in this case, in connection to the world of the dead. The American Isaac Asimov, my next author, is by contrast with Du Maurier a prolific writer of science fiction. Nightfall is one of his best short stories. Written in 1941, it was in 1990 rewritten as a novel with Robert Silverberg. In Greek mythology, permanent darkness and lack of sun characterize Hades as an appropriate background for the land of the dead. In Homer's Odyssey, there is a fascinating passage which implies that the world of the living should be the only one illuminated by the sun, because it is important that the dead should remain in darkness. It is Helios, the sun itself, who says these words: "Unless these men pay a just atonement for my cattle, I will descend to Hades' kingdom and shine among the dead." This, as Christine Soubry-Nouin remarks, is a threat of a reverse disordered world, which reflects the idea that the dead should dwell in darkness and that an existence for the living in eternal night would be unthinkable and extremely doubtful. Asimov's Nightfall seems to take this idea as its starting point, the effects of a life in eternal night. The story is set on a planet, Lagash, ordinarily illuminated by the constant light of 6 suns. It begins with a skeptical journalist who visits the university observatory to interview a group of scientists who warn the civilization will soon end. The researchers explain that they have discovered evidence of numerous ancient civilizations on Lagash, all destroyed by fire, with each collapse occurring about 2,500 years apart. The scientists theorize that earlier civilizations were destroyed by people who went insane during previous periods of universal darkness and, desperate for any light source, started large fires that destroyed cities. Oral accounts of the chaos from crazed survivors and small children were passed down through the ages and produced some sort of religious sacred text. This idea of the destruction of successive civilization of men reminds us also of the myth of the ages of men, according to Hesiod's Works and Days, where successive races of men were destroyed by the gods, although this seems to be a resemblance rather than a more specific reference. The coming darkness and people's reaction to it are the focus of Asimov's story. When the last of the suns eclipses, the consequences will be panic and destruction. He stared moodily out of the skyline, where Gamma, the brightest of the planet's 6 suns, was setting. Of the 6 suns, only Beta is left on the sky. Beta was almost at zenith, its ruddy light flooding the landscape to an unusual orange as the brilliant rays of setting Gamma died. The notion that it is not possible to survive in complete darkness is repeated throughout the text. The end of the world is at hand. Yes, but what about tomorrow? There'll be no tomorrow. To know that in a little minute you would be here physically, and yet all the essence would be dead and drowned in the black madness, for this was the dark and the cold and the doom. Another idea which is expressed repeatedly is that darkness will bring madness and violence. You say there is going to be a worldwide darkness in a few hours, and that all mankind will go violently insane. In Greek mythology, Lyssa is the personification of madness, who, according to Euripides' tragedy Heracles, is a daughter of Nyx, Night, who was sent by Hera to attack Heracles and induce him to slaughter his own family, being transformed into a bacchant of Hades. Other characters related to madness in Greek myth are the Erinyes, who are strongly connected with darkness and the world of the dead. It seems evident that the relationship between darkness, night, and madness expressed in Nightfall is also expressed in Greek myth in connection with Hades and death. Lagash then is going to be transformed into a place of destruction and death, and as it goes into darkness, it becomes an equivalent of the classical underworld through this series of motifs. It shows how these motifs are rooted in classical traditions, giving a sense of the ancient underworld and at the same time constructing a visual image of an underworld, combining also ideas and analogies of Christian apocalypse and hell with the images of fire and violence. It is worth adding that Lord Byron wrote a poem called Darkness, influenced by an Italian astronomer who predicted that the sun was on the verge of burning out. As a study by Michael Treat points out, Byron might or might not have influenced Asimov, but it is remarkable that two different men writing in two different eras and in different forms should share similar visions of men driven mad even to death and extinction in a world deprived of light. As for a conscious influence of classical texts and mythology, as Edith Hall notes, Asimov read Homer and Greek mythology voraciously during his New York boyhood, and among his many published books, he wrote or edited more than 500, one is dedicated to the Greeks, A Great Adventure. My third author is Frances Stevens, the pen name of Gertrude Burroughs Bennett, who was the first major female writer of science fiction in the US and has been credited as the inventor of the dark fantasy as a subgenre, and the novelist The Heads of Cerberus. The reference to the classical underworld is already explicit in the novel's title, and once more we find a reference to the monster Cerberus, guardian dog of the gates of Hades. In fact, the title refers to the adorned lid of an art object. It seems to be a glass vial, about 6 inches in length. It tapered to a point at one end, while the other was capped with silver, daintily carved to the shape of 3 dogs' heads. The vial was filled to the top with some substance of the color of gray emery, said to have carved by Benvenuto Cellini for his patron. The legend runs that the gray dust within it was gathered from the rocks at the gates of purgatory by the poet Dante, and that it was to contain this dust that the Duke required the vial. The author is conscious of using the mythological name of the guardian of Hades, and this already situates the reader in the classical realm of the dead. I suppose to represent the 3-headed dog, Cerberus, the one that guarded the gates of Pluto's realm in the old mythology. But it also appears associated with the Christian concept of purgatory through Dante's vision, as Cerberus in the Divine Comedy guards over the 3rd circle of hell. The innovative story, written by a woman, is considered the first fantasy of science fiction approaching the theme of the parallel worlds concept. Viola Trenmore is spending time in 1918 Philadelphia in the company of her brother and two friends. By opening the vial, which one of them has bought at an auction, and inhaling the dust contained in it, they are propelled to a strange limbo called Ulythia, although at first they are taken as dead. In Ulythia, they meet what they call the shadow people and the white weaver, who, like the Greek Moira or Odysseus' wife Penelope, live in order to stop time. From there and through the gateway of the moon, they end up in a futuristic version of Philadelphia in 2118, a dystopian world with a regime which uses murderous public competitions to keep the population subjugated, and the oppressed are forced to wear large yellow buttons. The position of supreme authority is held by a woman, and once a year she oversees competitions to the death to determine who rules alongside her. When Viola and the others are forced to take part in these strange and deadly games, it will take their combined wits for them to escape this strange world and return home. The three friends' journey into the future was a sort of catabasis down into the underworld, and the death imagery is used to prepare the readers for a new kind of literary motif, that of the dystopian future. The motif of the voyage is indeed well known in classical myth, although we have no examples of the voyage into the future, only some ideas about anticipation of the future in prediction, as Professor Buxton mentioned this morning in his lecture. For instance, in the character of Tiresias, whom Odysseus encounters in Hades as one of the shades of the dead, and who predicts to him some news about his journey back to Ithaca. Francis Stevens insists on the shadow-like existence of Ulythia and its inhabitants, who are considered ghostly and phantasmal. Ulythia, phantom borderline of life. The similarities between these phantoms and the shades of the dead in the Homeric Hades seem clear. References to shadows and thin smoke are frequent. The people believe implicitly that should the servants become incensed and strike that bell, the city, the people would dissolve into air like thin smoke. Even when once everything is over and they are safe back and they try to explain what had happened to them, they mention a girl who has traveled with them, but she was nothing, a phantasm, the materialized figment of a dream. The authors in my three examples were engaged in exploring three different well-established thematics of science fiction: the scientific experiment, a human-like society in a remote planet, and the voyage into the future. The engagements with myth and classical antiquity are different and complex, but they show concepts, motifs, and names which are rooted in the classical tradition and which help to elaborate an imaginary world in which the reader can find familiar and recognizable elements in relation to the mythology of the Greco-Roman world of the dead. Thanks in particular to the Homeric allusions, the stories evoke especially the ideas of permanent darkness and the immaterial character of the dead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mercedes. You're very good in keeping to time as well. So now is the opportunity for questions to be asked via chat. And we have one from Christina Doku, who says, could you please comment on the following? Why do you think these authors seek to classicize death, which is a universal and diachronical concern anyway, through these mythical references?
Well, my authors are three examples I found and I wanted to bring here. Maybe there are more authors using these motifs. And well, I think perhaps the explanation must be more individual than taking the three together, because as I say, my choice was these authors, but not for a particular reason, in the sense that I found them interesting examples, but it doesn't mean that there are no more examples. I think Daphne du Maurier, to begin with, she uses classical myths for other short stories. So it's not a surprise that she uses classical myth for this particular theme as well. And as for the others, well, more or less what I mentioned about Asimov, that obviously he knew the Greeks well enough to perhaps suggest these ideas of darkness and ideas of characteristics in Hades, in classical Hades. And as for the third author, I would say I don't know her enough. I don't think she's very well known in the sense of all the stories, but I presumably she's got a good classical education as well to be able. And another aspect is that obviously in this, particularly in this third example, is how these classical ideas, death and the underworld, go into a Christian belief, and then obviously all that is also reflected into these authors. I don't know if that if that's an answer for her question.
Are there any other questions from chat? While we're waiting for a question, can I ask you something that sort of follows on from Christina's question, which is I'm always interested when I find modern allusions to myth to wonder whether the effect of them is to reinforce the myth or whether they're revisionary to change the myth. So the question I want to ask is, do you feel that these three stories that you talked about alter our perception of the classical underworld?
Well, I don't know at what extent they can change the perception of the underworld, but perhaps in a way, this connection with science fiction, with these experiments, or with this planet and all that, they can make these classical motifs more close to us, in a way, close to our own fiction. Myths have been always, as you know well, have been used for many purposes, and one of them has been to give a kind of prestige to stories. You know, the same in art, the same in many other media. As soon as you present one of these myths or classical names, it's as if you give them some sort of prestige. You know, that's what classical education used to have.
Yes, thank you. I don't see any more questions on chat coming up. So last chance, or else we'll move on to the next paper. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mercedes, for that interesting paper. We seem to have still lost Dr. Altabayeva, so I'm going to ask Irini Panameritaki if she will give her paper. I know Irini extremely well since she has worked with me in the Department of Literature at the the Myth Reading Group, part of the Centre for Myth Studies in the University of Essex. and she is indeed a visiting fellow in the Department of Psychosocial and Psychoanalytic Studies at the university. And she has recently relocated to Athens. Her PhD thesis was on comparative literature. I'm sure she's going to give us a very good paper, the title of which is A Continuous Mutation, Metamorphoses in Alex Garland's Annihilation, 2018. Over to you.
Thank you, Liam, for this nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. It's my second year of joining the conference. I'm very sad I couldn't come to Madrid, but here I am. Give me a second to share my screen. Okay, hopefully you should be able to see my PowerPoint now.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so let me put my timer on. Okay, so my paper will look at the relationship of myth and science fiction by examining the theme of metamorphosis and its visual manifestations in the 2018 film Annihilation, which is directed by Alex Garland. The idea of metamorphosis in Western literature is haunted by Ovid's Metamorphoses, an extensive collection of poetic narratives about mortals and gods that transform into animals, plants, or alternative natural forms. Ovid's work serves as the basis for my discussion of the idea of transformation in relation to the changes that occur in Annihilation that the protagonist interprets as, and I quote, malignant mutations like tumors, end of quote. In juxtaposing Ovid's shifting world with Garland's alien mutations, I argue that we can trace a contemporary, yet often horrific, narrative of subjectivity. Subjectivity in Garland's universe is understood as fluid, unstable, and not entirely human. In a similar vein to Ovid, Garland's science fiction narrative is preoccupied with themes of rebirth and death, immortality and love, amongst others, all put together in an expanding alien world where it seems that humanity has very little control. The film has been loosely adapted by Garland based on his reading of Jeff Vandermeer's book, Annihilation, which is part of a trilogy called The Southern Reach. And the director decided not to reread the book, but worked on his own memory of it, and I quote, like a dream of the book, end of quote. Indeed, Garland highlights the importance of dreams and memories throughout the film by creating a polymorphic landscape which disorients its visitors, including the audience, as if they've been dreaming. In an online interview about the film, Garland stated that the film is, and I quote, fearlessly subjective, end of quote, inviting thus several interpretations from the audience and critics. A few words about the plots of the film. We follow a team of women scientists on a secret US government mission to explore an area which has been infected by an extraterrestrial life form and steadily expands by swallowing entire cities. The expedition team is made up of a biologist, a psychologist, a geomorphologist, a physicist, and a paramedic. And the journey is narrated through a series of flashbacks recounted by the biologist named Lena, played by Natalie Portman. Lena's husband, Kane, was part of an earlier mission into the same area and the only human to return alive from it. Shortly after Kane returns home, he falls into a coma, which is a clear indication that he has been infected with some sort of virus during his stay inside the area. Lena then joins the next mission to study the so-called the Shimmer, which is an iridescent substance that covers Area X, but primarily to save Kane in a bold move that reminds us of Orpheus attempting to save Eurydice from the underworld, as it has been pointed out by a number of reviewers of the film. The team's journey towards the lighthouse, which is the source of the shimmer, is interrupted by a series of incomprehensible DNA mutations. And this is the aspect of the film I would like to focus on. The team soon realizes that the shimmer causes human and non-human life forms to mutate. The team's physicist explains, and I quote, "It is a prism, but it refracts everything," end of quote, causing animal, plant, and human species to blend together in a terrifying and often Ovidian fashion. It's not the first time Garland crosses paths with myth and science fiction. In his 2014 film Ex Machina, the myth of Galatea and Pygmalion served as a subtext for an exploration of the limits of artificial intelligence. The ending of Ex Machina suggested that robots may very well exist beyond the control of their human creator. Similarly, in Annihilation, Garland suggests that the alien visitor or invader remains on Earth, transforming everything at the expense of humans who fail to contain it. The loss of control over one's body or identity preoccupied Ovid as well. Ovid links the metamorphosis in his work to an existential question, that of the soul's immortality, despite the change in form, as he follows the teachings of Pythagoras, who reminds us, and this is a quote from the Metamorphosis, that everything changes, nothing dies, and nothing retains its form, end of quote. This idea preoccupied Ovid, and thus the potential transformation of the soul, and by extension subjectivity, became an important aspect of metamorphic stories. Metamorphosis then challenges the subjectivity of the one who is transformed and questions the stability of the self in a story. Indeed, in Ovid, nobody's identity or body is safe, as a god or a goddess might intervene to change it. But while in the Metamorphosis, there's usually divinity involved with a change, in Annihilation, the change is caused by an alien agency, which might as well be a replacement for the divine element. Immortality preoccupies Lina as well, as she often wonders on the existence of an immortal cell that keeps dividing itself infinitely. In his extensive study of science fiction, Adam Roberts remarks on the relationship of myth and science fiction by stating that science fiction has replaced the literalist religious views of older cultures with mythic and metaphorical meaning, and modernity moved from these literal religious beliefs to more potent, mythic, or metaphorical spheres. What we witness in Annihilation is metamorphosis through the idea of mutation, not necessarily metaphorical, but as I said, it is still grounded on myth. Early in the film, we are shown one of Lina's university lectures on cancerous cells. She explains how a cell divides itself and becomes cancerous, but also reminds students that, and I quote, "Mutation is also the reason we exist," end of quote. A paradox that Garland explores throughout the film. Once Lina and her team are inside the shimmer, they start encountering different mutations that are subtle at first, but become more extreme as they grow closer to the lighthouse. The first mutation is relatively uneventful, yet Lina observes that while the plants are stuck in a continuous mutation, as it says, you could call it a pathology if you saw this on a human, associating thus mutation to an illness, possibly a cancerous one. The changes become horrifying as the team is attacked by a mutated albino crocodile with shark teeth. They then discover a human skeleton grown into a sort of throne of mutated branches. And then the team watches a video of a soldier from a previous expedition with worms moving inside his stomach. The unlikely DNA mutations now include humans, and the landscape becomes even more violent as the team progresses deeper into the area. Often, though, the horrifying changes coexist with the beautiful ones. After a bear kills the geomorphologist, Lena wanders in the forest looking for her body. In a twisted version of Actaeon's story, Lena is ready to shoot a white deer with blossomed antlers. However, she is caught off guard when she notices a duplicate deer next to it that mimics the movements of the original. Lena later recounts the experience in an interrogation room, highlighting the presence of duplicate forms inside the shimmer. Of particular interest is a human-animal combination that the team encounters, which testifies to the complexity of the transformations inside the shimmer. The bear who killed the geomorphologist assimilates her last words, very much like the nymph Echo in the story of Narcissus. Instead of roaring, the bear can only cry, "Help me," with an uncanny human voice. The next day, Josie, the physicist, explains to Lena, and I quote, "As she was dying," and that's the geomorphologist who was killed by the bear, "part of her mind became part of the creature that killed her. And that is a terrible death," end of quote. Shortly after, the physicist becomes a tree, very much like Daphne, and joins the human-shaped plants of the landscape, admitting that, unlike the other members of the team, she does not wish to fight these mutations. The changes in Area X are not transformations in the classical sense, but some of them echo the Ovidian metamorphoses in the way they blend the forms and the bodies in violent and surprising ways. The film's thematic preoccupation with subjectivity is manifested when Lena witnesses the creation of her own, her very own duplicate inside the lighthouse, after discovering her real husband is dead and the man who returned home was just a copy from the shimmer. The replacement of humanity with an alien form, or even worse, with an alien doppelganger, is a commonly expressed anxiety present in science fiction narratives. The shimmering copy of Lena highlights the reservations about crossing the boundaries of the human or becoming something other than human that may include other life forms. As Priscilla Wald observes, science fiction records the hopes as well as the fears of a future where mutants conceived in laboratories of the imagination become prototypes of transformation, end of quote. Another fear that Annihilation may have recorded is that of ecological destruction. In an interview carried out in the Goodreads website, the writer of the novel, Vandermeer, clarified one of the novel's central themes. And he says, "To me, it's about adaptation to what's coming, to also better understand that we do not in fact stick out from our landscape, but we are part of it," end of quote. Despite the terrifying encounter with her double, Lena's opinion about the shimmer in the film confirms Vandermeer's thoughts. She says to the psychologist, and I quote, "It wasn't destroying, but changing everything, making something new," end of quote. This idea of self-destruction and rebirth is reinforced by the appearance of a snake tattoo that is not noticeable on Lena's forearm at the end of the film. Lena has no tattoos when she enters the shimmer. The tattoo depicts a self-devouring snake, Ouroboros, an ancient symbol of death and rebirth. The snake is not drawn into a circle, but in the shape of the infinity symbol. In classical mythology, the serpent is also associated with the snake or dragon, python or python, that was killed by Apollo, and also to the prophetess Pythia in Delphi. For Jung, the Ouroboros bears an archetypal significance and was also adopted by the alchemists as a symbol of wholeness and is associated with the process of individuation, a psychic transformation. The presence of the Ouroboros in the film could suggest the connection between Lina and her double is more than it seems. During her encounter with the humanoid inside the lighthouse, Lina places her hands in the hands of her copy while trying to activate a grenade. Lina holds the safety pin on the right side of the screenshot, and the duplicate, which is on the left on the picture, is bearing the snake tattoo. Going back to what Lina says to the psychologist about the shimmer, about creating something new, the Ouroboros symbol allows us to tie together the idea of immortality and death that hangs over Lina's observations on cancerous cells and regeneration, and to consider the shimmer and its mutations in mythical terms, even as agents of renewal and rebirth. To conclude, the idea of an eternally changing subject can provide an answer that may well apply to all the visions of subjectivity. In order to survive, the subject, individual and collective alike, needs to metamorphose. Garland seems to suggest that in order to survive, we need to accept the fluidity of ourselves, or at least be ready to acknowledge that ourselves may not be strictly human in the future. The film's final scene is ambiguous, as the embrace between Lina and Cain could also be an embrace between their alien clones. Lina asks her husband, and I quote, "You aren't Cain, are you?" Only for him to reply, "I don't think so." Cain's question to Lina, "Are you Lina?" is left unanswered, implying that both could be copies that the shimmer created and not their original selves. The story ends with a promise or a warning that the future will be a combination of a human and non-human, where the subject is part of a natural landscape, whether they're conscious of it or not. Thank you.
Thank you for this introduction to a film which I'm afraid I haven't seen yet, but after hearing your paper, I'm sure I will try and view it. Do we have any questions, immediate questions from chat? Right. So again from Christina Doku. Thank you for your analysis of what was, for me, a very upsetting film, mainly because I kept wondering why those humans seemed so pathetically unresisting of their transformations, why they didn't just turn back and run out screaming. So the question is, would you say that your myth-related understanding of mutation as renewal might be a reason for this attitude?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Christina. I think it was a very upsetting film to begin with, and I think that's mainly the reason I started thinking about it. I watched the film and then I thought, well, that was strange. It is a very uncomfortable film. It makes the viewer feel uncomfortable. You feel the protagonist feel uncomfortable as well. And as Christina said, they seemed unresisting of their transformation, why they didn't turn back. I think this is part because supposedly the shimmer exercises a power over the protagonist, but not to the rest of them. So Lina supposedly goes into the area to save her husband. The way I view it is that's not the reason at all. It's because she's curious of what the shimmer is from a scientific point of view. And after the team has been there for a while, it's only the physicist that realizes that, well, the transformations are inevitable and they are going to die there. So that she kind of accepts that she needs to be part of a landscape. Now about the second part of the question, that the mutation as a renewal might be a reason for this attitude. I think the film shows both. On one hand, it shows the paramedic resisting the transformation, resisting to believe what she sees inside the shimmer, and she dies a horrific death. And on the other hand, we've got Lena and the physicist. One of them becomes a tree, and Lena comes out seemingly fine, or her double comes out fine. And she kind of has accepted mutation as a renewal. So I think the film shows both attitudes to transformation. I don't know if that answers the question.
We have another question from Metka, who says, a very interesting presentation, well done. I'm thinking back to the previous session, especially to Natalie Kramer's paper about the humanoid robots already fully functioning in Japan. So sci-fi has already become reality?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Well, maybe we don't need the question mark anymore, I think. I think what I found interesting with today's presentation, and what also Mercedes was talking about in the beginning about the visions of the underworld, and then Natalie about our attitudes to robots and dolls and so on. It's that science fiction and myth both engage with issues that come up all the time, and it engages with them over and over again. I mean, some of the, I don't know if we've passed that point where science fiction used to be scary or horrifying, but I think certainly maybe science fiction has come closer to myth, but making the dystopian futures or the transformations or the robots less scary, because we see them all the time. So in that sense, I see it as becoming a reality.
I don't know whether that's reassuring or disturbing. But as I said, I haven't seen the film, but in some ways it reminded me of Stanislaw Lem's novels and Tarkovsky's film. I mean, Solaris and Roadside Picnic and Stalker. But they, I mean, maybe my memory is failing me, but they didn't seem to be mythic.
I have to admit I haven't watched The Stalker, but there were a number of reviews that were clearly saying that one of the influences of Garland could have been The Stalker or Solaris, or Tarkovsky at least. But I think both directors engage with the kind of weird landscape and how the subject fits into that landscape. But I'm not even sure if Garland's narrative was deliberately mythic, but I certainly, when I saw it, I thought, well, that's upsetting. And then I started thinking about myth.
Well, I mean, you've certainly pointed to the parallels with classical mythology, so I'm convinced by that. One thing that interested me was on a more sort of general, perhaps philosophical note, is the phrase continuous mutation. Now, with metamorphosis, there may be just one change from a human to a tree or something like that. But if we're talking about humanity, aren't we actually living a continuous mutation?
Yes, yeah. When you say humanity, you mean like our human bodies, or humanity as with the technological progress?
No, I meant our human bodies. So I mean, in simply the non-science fiction sense, that we're continually evolving, and evolution is a metamorphosis. Sorry, is a mutation.
Yeah, yeah.
So my question really is, what does the continuous tell us?
I think even the film, I mean, the phrase is very, very interesting, like the phrase continuous mutation, but even in the film, I mean, we don't see continuous happening in front. I think they mean continuous in the sense that, I'm not sure if I'm going to explain this right. A body is borrowing genes from another body, like a tree is borrowing genes from a human to create something new. And that's why I interpret it as a transformation. But in scientific terms, that could be a cell or a cancer mutation. But I think you're right about the word continuous, and that maybe it's not clear in the film, but in humanity terms, we are in a continuous change, and we decay, and then we die. But yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure about the phrase continuous, but I'll think about it.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions or comments from chat? I'm not quite sure what we should do now because we seem to have lost Saule Altive Sheba.
Hello again. Thank you
Yeah,
very
so
much
what should we do?
for your presentations. I think we have to leave it like this today, and hope that Saul will be able to join us another day. But she's clearly having problems with her internet connection, so I think we ought to leave it like this for today. But thank you so much for your presentations, Irini and Mercedes, and thank you so much, Leon, for moderating this session. And I really hope you'll be able to join us again tomorrow and Thursday and Friday for the following of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
End of session.
Antonella, thank you, Leon.
Thank you all.
Bye.